you know, this class a priority. It's easy to join via Zoom. It's easy to catch up on YouTube, but the reason that we're here is we're here to learn and keep up with our classes. It's hard, right? Everybody's got all this stuff going on, keeping track of everybody, but make sure that we're making this a priority as well. Okay. So the respiratory system, here's a cool picture of an elk. Oh, if I can get it on this PowerPoint. Taking a nice cold breath of fresh air. Okay, aren't we glad that our respiratory system is one of those systems that's an involuntary movement, right? I'm able to stand up here and talk and not think, breathe, breathe, breathe. Sometimes we have to say that to ourselves, right? But most of the time, our respiratory system is an involuntary movement. So we're going to talk about the structures and functions of the upper and the lower respiratory system. We're going to talk about how that gas exchange is accomplished. So the gas exchange is how do we get in oxygen and out carbon dioxide really fast, right? Every time you take a big breath in and out, all of that gas exchange happened very quickly. So where is that and how is that accomplished? The mechanism for expiration and inspiration, or known as your inhale and your exhale. How breathing is controlled by the nervous system, which that kind of makes sense, right? Your nervous system is how you react to stimuli, whether that be something that was sharp, scary, soft, comforting, all those different things that your nervous system reacts to. It works with your respiratory system to help evolve and make sure that you are maintaining equilibrium as best as possible. And we're going to talk about some common infections and disorders of the respiratory system. Okay. So the respiration system is the process by which oxygen enters your internal environment, enters your body, and carbon dioxide leaves your body by diffusing across the respiratory surface. Okay, when you start to think about the respiratory system, taking deep breaths, you're thinking of lungs, your mouth, your nose, those things. We're going to talk about how that works and all those processes that go along with that, not just the basic in and out. Okay, you first have your oral cavity or your mouth. When talking about the respiratory system and the digestive system that we talked about on Monday, we need to make sure that we know that the mouth is a part of both of those, right? You can also kind of consider the nasal cavity up there as well, but as you know, we're probably not putting food up our nose, right? So the nasal cavity is pretty strictly used for some senses and the respiratory system. Your mouth, you can chew food and talk at the same time, even though your mom probably told you not to do that growing up. But we do have the ability to use our mouth for a couple of different things. It supplements the airway when breathing is labored. That's also like you just ran up a flight of stairs. You're probably not doing the normal in through your nose, out through your mouth, even though they tell you to do that, they being the people who tell you how to breathe effectively. Most of the time, if you're out of breath, you're gonna start breathing through your mouth a little bit more, okay? Your pharynx is your throat where the airway connects the nasal cavity and the mouth. That's why when you're sleeping, unless you're a mouth breather while you're sleeping, most of the time your mouth is closed or slightly open and your nose, and they join together in your pharynx so that the air can go down your throat and to your epiglottis. Your epiglottis, remember, is that gatekeeper, or the you go this way of the larynx, which opens up when you have to swallow food and is open when you're just talking and breathing as a normal day goes by, okay? Your larynx is your voice box, okay? It's this part in your throat and your airway where sound is produced. It closes off during swallowing. So technically, when you go to swallow a piece of food, you can't talk in that instance, okay? But if you're chewing some gum and talking to your friends, you're fine, right? Because the food or whatever you're going on is up here in your mouth. As soon as it gets down to the epiglottis in your voice box, you technically can't talk in that instance, okay? But once your food or your airways, then we go to your trachea. We looked at the trachea in the rat dissection, and this is considered your windpipe. Maybe some people call it your windpipe. It's fairly structured. It connects the larynx with two bronchi that lead to the lungs. And I'll show you a better picture of that here in a couple of slides, okay? The lungs have a double layer of membranes called a pleural membrane. The word pleural, singular and plural, if you're like an English major or you remember that from maybe your high school English class, having something that's plural means more than one. So the people went on a walk instead of saying the person went on a walk. That's the difference between singular and plural. So a pleural membrane is a double layer membrane that separates lungs from other organs. The narrow fluid-filled space between its two layers is where the role happens for breathing. Okay, so we went down the trachea. Now we are kind of into the lungs. Okay, there's one pair of lungs. So we have one lung or two lungs. They are a lobed elastic organ of breathing, and it enhances gas exchange between the internal environment and the outside air. So when you take a deep breath in of oxygen, it goes into your lungs, which helps with the gas exchange, getting the oxygen to your extremities, from your fingers to your toes, to your legs, all the way up to your brain, and quickly exhaling the waste, which is carbon dioxide. Okay, lucky for us, plants use carbon dioxide and we use the oxygen that they give off. Your intercostal muscles, this is at your rib cage. So you have your rib cage, then you have these intercostal muscles between your rib cage. These are skeletal muscles with roles in breathing. There are two sets of intercostal muscles. You have internal and external, okay? If you're just sitting there, minding your own business, taking some notes, you're probably not using a ton of your intercostal muscles. You might be a little bit if you're just trying to relax. But when you're told to take a deep breath and you think to yourself, I am going to take a deep breath now, that's when those intercostal muscles engage in your rib cage. Remember, skeletal muscles, we have different types of muscle tissue. You have cardiac muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is voluntary movement. So essentially your conscious being telling your muscles to do something. And so if the skeletal muscles are if the intercostal muscles are skeletal muscles, there has to be a command to engage those. Then you have your diaphragm. This is that muscle sheet between the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity with roles in breathing. Okay, I think of it like a balloon. Okay, when we pull down on that diaphragm or expand it, maybe if you ever took choir or band or something like that where you had to use a lot of air force, your diaphragm will expand. It'll help expand your lungs. And then when your diaphragm contracts, it essentially expels the carbon dioxide out of your body. So it kind of helps with that movement. Your bronchial tree, this is that branching like thing inside your lungs, and this helps with starting with and ending with the air sacs, or also known as the alveoli of the lung tissue. And you can see them down here. They kind of look like these little, I don't know, lollipops or a bunch of cotton candy down here in the bottom right. And this is also where the pulmonary capillaries are embedded. Remember when we talked about the heart, okay? You go through the left ventricle, or the left atrium, wow, I need to start over. Right atrium, right ventricle, left, and then you go out of the pulmonary trunk to go get some oxygen. Then you go through the pulmonary arteries and veins. You also go through the capillaries in there, okay? This is where the oxygen is kind of picked up, right? So you can think of it like a train. You got to stop at that station, pick up this person, go to the next train station. We're picking up some oxygen here. That's happening in the bronchial tree with the alveoli sacs where the pulmonary capillaries are. Okay, here's a little more of a zoomed in picture, okay? If you've ever had a sinus infection, and you can maybe just like nod to yourself if you'd like. Sinus infections are usually no fun, but your sinuses help with the drainage of liquid for a couple of different things. It helps fight off infections, allergies, They can help with the movement and the moistening of your air. So if you've ever been in a really dry room, you need to take a lot of deep breaths in that room. Maybe you're playing a sport in like an indoor complex. The air can be really dry, okay? Your body does have some mechanisms to kind of moisten that air, but it can also kind of dry you out a little bit. It can also cause some problems with your sinuses. Then you have your nasal cavity, okay? So your nasal cavity you're very familiar with. You're probably breathing through it a little bit right now. I know we're behind a mask right now. Your nasal cavity, it's where you're then connected to your hard palate here on the bottom. Your nasal cavity and your oral cavity or your mouth, they connect here in the pharynx, which I don't believe is labeled, but it's a big word here on the left. Your larynx then is down here. Your epiglottis is right here, which is where that gatekeeper is. When you're breathing normal, not eating or chewing food, your epiglottis is kind of in that open state. It then closes off that airway when you go to swallow food down your esophagus. Your esophagus is smaller than your trachea, okay? A couple of you on the homework, or at least the quiz from Wednesday, said that the esophagus was part of the respiratory system. That's technically not correct because the trachea is a part of the respiratory system. The esophagus is part of the digestive system because the esophagus has nothing to do with breathing. It's just kind of sitting there until you need to swallow or eat some food and intake some fuel. Okay. Your tongue helps, with the digestion, but it also can help kind of moisten your breathing in that respiratory system. It also helps when you're talking, right? If you try talking without your tongue, it starts to sound a little silly. Nose breathing. This is when the nose opens up at the nostrils and the nares, and it leads into the nasal cavity, which makes sense. This happens for us all the time, okay? You can also tell possibly when your nose is plugged. Maybe you have allergies or a cold or something. You can tell when your nose is plugged because you have to breathe out of your mouth a lot. You're like, man, I really took advantage of this nose breathing before that. The hair and mucus in your nose filter the air, which is really helpful, whether that be pollution, dust, allergens, things like that. The hairs and the mucus kind of stop that in your nose. The nasal cavity has a lot of capillaries that warm and moisten the air. That's important. Your body wants to, remember, maintain equilibrium as much as possible. And so it wants the air that you're breathing to be at a certain temperature and to be at a certain texture because it kind of works harder than we need it to when the air is a little bit dry or too humid or too hot or too cold. Your nose and your nasal cavity help with that, whether that be changing the temperature of the air that you intake or moistening that air a little bit. The specialized cells act as odor receptors. That makes sense, right? If you go to smell a candle or smell some fresh, clean laundry, you know what those things smell like. Those specialized cells in your nose are intaking the scent of that air. Your tear glands do drain into the nasal cavities, and they can lead to a runny nose. So anytime you're hysterically crying, maybe you're watching a really sad movie, and your nose starts to run, that's because it's all kind of connected together. All right, any mouth breathers out there? That makes me think of Stranger Things, right? Yeah. Air flows through the mouth and into the pharynx and larynx. So you can breathe through your mouth consistently if you need to. It's more effective for our body to breathe in through your nose. Remember, the nose has those filters, the little hairs in your nose. It moistens, it warms it, it protects our body. You can breathe through your mouth. If you breathe out through your mouth too much, you maybe start to kind of have like a dryness feeling, which isn't that great of a feeling. But so you can breathe through your mouth consistently, but your body wants to breathe through your nose majority of the time. Until you get out of breath or you maybe need to intake more air, that's when you start breathing through your mouth. The larynx is also called your voice box, okay? And I have a picture here, I think it's either on the next slide or in 2 slides, of what that larynx looks like. and it is where it kind of looks like two pieces of tissue like this. And when someone's talking, it'll kind of move open and close. And the way that it vibrates off of your throat, and in combination with the air coming out and the way that your tongue is moving, is how we have language communication. So it contains the vocal cords protected by the epiglottis, which is also why when you swallow food, the epiglottis closes to the trachea so that you aren't damaging those vocal cords. You're not getting food or water stuck down that trachea. We've probably already all felt that before when you're talking and laughing with your friends. You take a drink of water and then you start choking. That's not a good feeling. The triangular cartilaginous structures that passes air between the pharynx and the trachea. So I'm going to show you here on the next slide. Here's the lovely image here at the top. It's where this is up at the top, you're seeing where the glottis is closed and where the glottis is open on the far right, okay? Your vocal cords kind of pull or contract these, the glottis, and it's connected also to the base of your tongue, as you can see here on the left. And when you're talking, the combination of your tongue movement, the air flowing through your mouth, and how the vocal cords vibrate on your throat is how you talk. Sometimes you'll have to try it, maybe not right now if you don't want to talk to yourself, but when you're talking, you can feel the vibration in your throat. That's the vocal cords and the glottis opening and closing and creating a pattern in which we know how to communicate with each other. Yeah.
So what happens to like your vocal cords and the glottis when like you lose your voice?
Yeah, so it's most likely swelling. So it's an immune reaction. So if you've got like, if you're sick, like when you get like a hoarse feeling and you like lose your, so that would be like some sort of either sinus infection, allergy. And the way our body reacts to that is by sending a whole bunch of helper T cells and antibodies to whatever location that is, most likely your sinuses and your throat, especially if maybe people have ever had like problems with your tonsils before. With any of that swelling that's going into your lymph nodes and your throat, it's just dampening that mechanical action. So it can cause that soreness, that swelling. And because of that swelling and that soreness, it can also be due to the lack of mucus or too much mucus in your throat. That's where you get that kind of hoarse, like lose your voice kind of. So it's a lot of it is due to the swelling and the mucus that would be in your throat. Good question. Good. So we've got the epiglottis, the glottis, opening and closing, the vocal cords, the tongue, all kind of working together. So I have this YouTube video here. I am not going to show it in class today. Most people don't like it. It's a camera of a doctor. They go down, unless we vote that we want to watch it, we can vote maybe, unless you want to watch it on your own. They are doing a procedure on someone and the doctor puts a camera down the person's throat and into their vocal cords and then down into their bronchial tree of their lungs. Does anybody want to see that right now? Oh, we got two in the back. Anybody not want to see that right now? Anybody like a strict no? Strict no. You can be a strict no. It's okay. Okay, we can watch it. Sign in to confirm my age.
Oh.
Okay. I don't even know what my personal YouTube account here that for you. I've never been asked that before. But I guess, oh, they believe that I'm
So this is me, Tom Warringer, and before I went into the bronchoscopy, I had to breathe in some salbutamol through a nebulizer to make sure my airways were nice and open and ready for the camera to go down into my lungs. Dr. Tim Heaps also had to put a cannula into the back of my hand. This is a tube that sits in the vein in the back of my hand, so it's like an access point into the vein, so we can easily put drugs in there. You can see here now, he's going to take the needle out of the tube. There's a plastic tube now sitting in my vein, and it's going to attach what the medics there call a mash. If you look in the bottom left corner, you see a little grey section. That's where
Passively. What it means by passively is it means after you take a deep breath in, the rest your body takes over. It's not like you have to actively tell your body to exhale. I mean, sometimes you do, right? But if I just took a deep breath in right now, the rest of me talking, I'm not thinking exhale, 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 which is really hard to say 10 times fast. Okay, so let's talk about the percentage of oxygen and carbon dioxide when you inhale and exhale. So when you inhale, the air that you are breathing in is about 21% oxygen and about 0.04% carbon dioxide. It's also the reason why we can breathe with a mask on. Okay, so you are exhaling some carbon dioxide that most likely is getting trapped a little bit in your mask, but your body knows how to react to that, because it's also the reason why if you're in like a closed space for a long time and things like that, there is carbon dioxide that you do inhale into your body. It's not good at high levels, but your body does know how to react to that. When you exhale, you're exhaling 5.6% carbon dioxide. So it's a higher percentage of carbon dioxide than was inhaled because of the chemical reactions in our body that allow us to use the oxygen, and the waste comes out as carbon dioxide. And then the oxygen is also exhaled. You don't use all of the oxygen that you inhale all of the time. It goes down about a little bit, less than 10%, which is interesting, okay? Inhaling is an active process where exhaling is passive, okay? So if you've ever heard of somebody being passive aggressive, that would be an exhale, right? Where they're like being aggressive, but they're not really like trying to be, they're trying to be nice, right? Inhale, so it's an active process. The intercostal muscles contract. We talked about that, expanding that chest cavity. The diaphragm moves down, flattens, the lung pressure decreases, the air flows into the lungs because we're pulling down on this balloon, okay? Then the passive exhalation process is where the intercostal muscles contract the lower rib cage. So they're contracting on your lower rib cage and it's moving that diaphragm to relax, pushing the air out of your lungs. At the beginning of class, like I said, how is your nervous system connected to your respiratory system, or how is our breathing linked to our nervous system? Well, one, we know that inhaling is an active process, so your body does have to somewhat tell itself to breathe in, even though it does seem like a passive act, I guess you would say. But the way that works is the respiratory center region of the brain that automatically regulates breathing. It's also located right here at the bottom, kind of close in communication with your lungs through nervous tissue. It's also connected to the intercostal nerves that stimulate those intercostal muscles. Remember, because those are skeletal muscles, they need to have a command. The command is the nerves. The nerves tell them what to do. The external intercostal muscles help expand the thoracic cavity by contracting. You also have a phrenic nerve that stimulates the diaphragm to contract. It's located a little bit further down here. And then the diaphragm helps expand the thoracic cavity by flattening when it contracts, okay? I think of this also in a couple different ways. Like I said at the beginning, maybe you're watching a movie and it's suspenseful and you're nervous and all of a sudden your breathing starts to increase, okay? This is just how your nerves, your nervous system does kind of communicate with your breathing. You can also think about that because your brain reacts with hormones. So if you've ever had like a fight or flight situation, when, if you've ever taken a psychology class, you know that our bodies will either fight or kind of fly away. I guess that makes sense, right? Or get rid of that situation when we feel like our body is in danger, okay? If we needed to get out of a situation really fast, like all of a sudden, let's say the fire alarm goes off in here. Even if it was just a drill, you maybe get like a little nervous, right? And you have to be like, okay, we have to get out of the building really fast. Luckily, our brain connects to our respiratory system and it says, hey, we're going to need some extra oxygen right now because we're going to be doing some exercise. We're going to be getting out of this building really fast. Obviously, it doesn't talk to it like that. But what happens then is maybe your breathing increases a little bit. It allows you to then get out of the building fast if there was a fire or a fire drill, okay? You could think of it in the opposite direction too. Maybe you're playing some nice classical music in your room, you've got some essential oils going, you're just having yourself a vibe, you're relaxing, maybe your breathing slows down a little bit, okay? It's also the way that your nerves are reacting to your respiratory system. It's conserving energy, it's lowering that heart rate, because if our heart works too hard for too long, it can have some adverse effects. So that's good, lowering that breathing, it's relaxing, and maybe then you just fall asleep. Right? So it's our body's way, how our brain and our nervous system is connected to that respiratory system, and it can act in two different ways. I guess even more than that, but both ends of the spectrum. Here's another kind of bullet point about that. So the control center in the brainstem, the medulla oblongata. Has anybody ever heard of that word before? Medulla oblongata. Yeah, maybe. Movie or a science class? Or both?
There was like, have you ever seen Studio C?
I've heard of it.
Comedy thing.
Yeah.
They did like a skit where it was mentioned.
Yeah.
And it has something to do with like kind of like functions, kind of like a lot of the brain functions, like I think if it gets damaged, your talking can be and other senses can be like affected, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, which makes sense, right? We're talking about the respiratory system. So if you damage your medulla oblongata, or maybe there was a stroke there or a lack of oxygen, like you said, it can affect your vocal skills. It's essentially your nerves forget the combination to say words and how it vibrates and how it moves off your tongue. Okay, so this sends out nerve impulses. This medulla oblongata is kind of located on the bottom of your brainstem right here, or on the bottom connected to your brainstem. It sends these nerve impulses, they're electrical signals, and they contract for muscle inspiration. So they're telling the rest of your respiratory system, hey, contract, we're going to inhale now. So if you've ever heard of SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome, it's really kind of a sad, tragic thing. It's thought to occur when this center stops sending out nerve signals, okay? So luckily for us, when we go to sleep at night, we don't have to think about breathing, right? You're just sleeping, you're just dreaming. Your medulla oblongata is regulating that breathing for you, especially in an infant or a child. If that part of their brain, stops sending out that signal, it doesn't work. The respiratory system doesn't work anymore. Okay. Here's a picture of some of those diseases and disorders that we talked about of the respiratory system, and they each have a little picture attached to them. There's pneumonia, the pulmonary fibrosis, pulmonary tuberculosis, asthma, emphysema, and bronchitis. You can read a little bit about those, just remembering if a question asks you, like, what's a disease or an infection of the lower respiratory system or an upper regulatory system? Making sure that we know the difference between those two to put them in the correct categories. So we talked about the functions and the parts of the respiratory system. The main function of the respiratory system, get our body oxygen, get the carbon dioxide out, okay? Remember, our body just wants to maintain equilibrium. It just wants to live and survive. Humans make it more complicated than that, right? The functions of the upper versus the lower respiratory system, thinking like kind of your neck being the distinguishing factor between upper and lower. We talked about where and how gas exchange is accomplished. That picture up here kind of shows that. It's showing how the lungs get the oxygen, but how does the oxygen get to the bloodstream so we can continue to use it for different functions. We talked about the mechanism for inhaling and exhaling, how inhaling is an active process. The muscles have to contract. And then when those muscles relax is when we move that diaphragm up and we can exhale or get rid of that carbon dioxide. The breathing is controlled by the medulla oblongata in your brain, okay? And it also can work with different hormones to help your body with different reactions. So maybe you're nervous about something, your breathing will increase. You're having a fight or flight situation, right? You get really anxious about something, your breathing may increase, or the other way around. You're relaxing, you're having fun with your friends, your breathing may go down, okay? It's your body's way of regulating and helping to maintain your different environments and situations. And then we talked about common infections and disorders. You've maybe dealt with them before, tonsillitis, sinus infection, bronchitis, things like that. Does anybody have any questions about the respiratory system? Okay, good. As always, you can just email me if you have a question. And as a reminder, you have assignment due tonight. And it'll look like this, your chapter 9 assignment. That was over the digestive system. That's due tonight. So if you hadn't had a chance to do that yet, don't forget. You also have chapter 10, your lecture assignment. It'll be due on Monday. And then next week we start talking about pregnancy and alcohol. So that's kind of a fun one. Our lab is really fun. We can look at the effects of pregnancy and alcohol. Alcohol being one of the kind of the first major drugs that we start to talk about in this class. Just let me know if you guys have any questions.